Okay, in this short video I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do maybe a mineral audit, some general principles. I suppose when we look at minerals, we must remember minerals play a key role in animal health, but there's other issues that can affect animal health, and we need to look at the system and make sure that we're not blaming minerals where we shouldn't. We need to be accurate about where minerals are causing the problem. And with minerals I see two things, and my article on Pika really highlighted this big issue with cows eating stones, briars, bushes, and that's a problem, and we can investigate that using bloods, going after sampling, and then we can look at minerals as overall more holistically from year to year, following what the minerals issues are on farm. And there's a couple of key elements to that. But first we must remember that we must look at the overall farm performance and production to see if there's other issues potentially that are contributing. And there's key times of the year, whether it's in our flocks, in our dairy herds, our beef herds, that minerals play a key role. Calving and lambing time, fertility, out at grass during the summer, in growing animals. So these are all key times of the year where we need to look at minerals. When we look at mineral audit, as I call it, there's also key samples and key times of the year we need to go in. I suppose there's three areas you look at. That's first of all the animals themselves. What clinical presentations are they showing? What symptoms are we seeing? What disease issues? What are the animals' coats like? What are the animals themselves telling us? Then we look at sampling animals, bloods, milk, liver biopsies for copper. And then we look at our forage analysis, from grass to silage to the feed that's going in, and in some cases even what minerals are in water. So we're putting together a picture on the farm, and that's what I'm going to try and do today. Is I'm going to step by step go through some general principles as how I approach what would seem like a lot of work. And I know that we must understand there has to be a cost benefit to all of these in relation to sampling, putting it together, and working with someone like your vet or nutritionist that will help you to make those decisions and see what tests you might need in your farm. Okay, the first place, whether it's cattle or sheep, we need to look at the animals and see what the animals themselves are telling us. What are their coats like? What are their dungs like? What are the symptoms that we're seeing on farm when we're investigating a mineral issue? Could minerals be involved? And the challenge with minerals is they're so complicated and have so many interactions that can be difficult by just looking alone, but it is an important starting point that we don't miss something like in lambs in the grazing season, like worms, some other metabolic issues that might be happening with sheep around lambing time. Same with cattle, that there's some other infectious disease agent going on. And that's why a thorough investigation, whether it's minerals or anything, just makes sense. But it is important to start with the animals and look and see, and then we can chase minerals within the animals through tests, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. Okay, so if we look at the animals and we've identified there's an issue, then we need to pull those animals out and do some testing on them. Now we need to look at what samples we can take from the animals first when we're looking at a mineral workup. And I suppose the first and most obvious one is a blood sample. And there's lots of debate around blood sampling when it comes to minerals and how accurate they are, and it depends on what we're testing for. One question people will ask is, how many samples should I take? We often talk about 10% of a herd or flock for a representative sample, which is very difficult to do with minerals because you're running into bigger costs and bigger numbers. I would have always said a minimum of 6 bloods and a maximum of try and get 8 to 10 if you could. And that would be my target. So I took 8 bloods this morning. And again, that's giving me a representative sample. When I'm looking at minerals and I'm looking at Pika or whatever it might be, I'm trying to target the most likely animals that are going to show clinical signs, or maybe show me the results, the deficiencies that I need. But it can vary case to case. If you look at different minerals on blood, selenium and iodine are quite reliable. There's different forms of testing, and you need to talk to your vet or nutritionist about what they recommend there. Copper on bloods, I would still do it, but it's not, because so much of the copper is stored in the liver. If it's depleting in blood, we're very, very low, and we must be mindful of that. When we're chasing copper samples, we're looking really for liver, and that's why we talk about liver biopsies. Now, they're quite hard on animals, but it can be done, and I think it's an important issue if we're really truly looking at copper. But now I suppose we can also use milk samples in dairy cows, but I would be a bigger fan of blood. I think blood play a role. It's the time of when we need to do them. So I would have always done bloods around drying off or pre-lambing, to give me an example, to give me an idea, particularly for selenium and iodine. And then again, I would use them where we were suspecting minerals in fertility cases or at grass around now or before breeding time, again chasing the seleniums, the iodines, And with pica obviously being the hot topic at the moment, low phosphorus, I would use bloods to check for that as well. Okay, so the animal is the next part of the jigsaw. Okay, so we've looked at cows, we've looked at herd clinically, we've looked at what tests we can do on animals. Forage analysis is really important when it comes to minerals. So we look at soil, we look at grass, we look at our silages, and we look at our concentrates to build a picture of what's going in. A very simple tip for farmers at the moment is you can actually do minerals analysis on freshly cut silage. So your minerals in your silage won't change from after wilting or fermentation. So we can take 4 or 5 samples from a couple of rows and take them, put them into clear plastic container and send them off now for mineral analysis. And we're trying to target the silage that's going to be fed to ewes, fed to cows around lambing and calving time, because that's where the real metabolic challenge is on, from our macro minerals to our calciums, our magnesiums, and then to our micro or trace elements like our coppers, our seleniums or iodines. So if we can know now in advance what's going on with our silage, mineral analysis, we can do it right now. I think it's a very valuable tool. So take 4 or 5 samples, send them off, get a composite sample, and we're starting to build a picture. Remember, this is a jigsaw. I'm going to talk again about what other forage samples we can look at to build a better picture. Okay, so that's a useful tool, the silage analysis for minerals that you can do on the field. When we've looked at cows, we've looked at sheep, seen the clinical symptoms, we've looked at what tests we can do. We've got to look at forage analysis. Silage is one part of it. Grass and grass-grazing systems is a really important component as well to know the mineral status of. We can take grass samples. It's something we don't commonly do, particularly for minerals, but it can be done. I use a very simple system where I take 5 samples out of a paddock, 4 in the periphery and 1 in the center. And the other thing we can do with grass is, if we're trying to build a composite sample over time, is we can take grass samples and freeze them, because all of these samplings do cost money. And if you're investigating problems, we can be very specific on what we need based on the clinical signs. If we're doing an overall profile, we're trying to build a picture for the farm, and we can do that by soil, grass analysis, forage analysis, and as well what we're putting into the animals. Any supplementation, we need to know what the mineral concentrations are. And there is a bit of science to working out the amount of minerals in feed, all the different feeds that might be going in. The more feeds you have going in, the more complicated it can be, but it can be done. And then we know the daily requirements for our sheep or our cows, and we're trying to look for that balance, and we're trying to avoid toxicities, which is really important, and we're trying to minimize deficiencies. And that's how I would look at building up a mineral profile, in really 3 simple ways. Look at the farm, what's happening. And minerals can be complicated, as I said, because there's so many interactions for different minerals. At lambing and calving time, it's really key. So when we're doing forage analysis on silages, we need to be sampling stuff that will be going into cows and sheep around that time, the critical time of lambing and calving. Because particularly our macros, like our calciums, our potassiums, our magnesiums, they're really important. And then we have our micro trace elements, our seleniums, iodines, coppers, cobalts, zinc. We're really looking at what elements are there and what do we need to supplement with. And I think when we're looking at sampling, of course there's a cost, but you need advice from your veterinary nutritionist to see what samples you need to do and build a profile. We don't need to do soil samples every single year, and we might not need to do grass samples every single year, but over time we're building a picture so we know what's happening on the farm. Certainly with forage analysis, it's very useful each year because things can change. And my key message is every farm is slightly different and must approach and have an idea of where your minerals are. Silage is going on in the background here today. Farming is busy at the moment, but building a mineral profile, some people, it's certainly something that came out of my last article on pica and cows eating stones, that we need to, everyone was looking for can I give this or can I give that? And what we need to understand is, what do we need to give? And we can only do that by putting some testing and science behind mineral issues when they're occurring, and certainly over time, building a mineral profile for your farm is what I'd advise.